Nothing's so bright. Good morning once again. We are going to reconvene with our keynote speaker. Please welcome our keynote speaker, the Honorable Gerald Morin. Honorable Gerald Morin's career and contributions are well known across the prairies and beyond. He began his professional journey with a degree in social work in 1978, working as a probation officer in northern Saskatchewan before entering the legal profession. In 1987, he earned his Bachelor of Laws from the University of Saskatchewan and went on to practice with Pandilla Morin Nahachowski Law Office in Prince Albert. In 2001, Justice Morin was appointed to the Provincial Court of Saskatchewan. His Cree language fluency and his northern upbringing became central to his judicial work, particularly through the Provincial Cree Court Circuit. This groundbreaking initiative provided culturally sensitive legal services to Cree-speaking clients in northern Saskatchewan, affirming the place of Cree within the justice system. Justice Morin's leadership extended nationally. He was appointed to the bench of the Northwest Territories in 2008 and in the Yukon in 2016, where he continued to champion fairness, access to justice, and the recognition of Indigenous languages and legal traditions. By elevating the Cree language and its role in the Cree way of life, Justice Morin has left a lasting mark on Canada's legal system and on a path towards reconciliation. Let's welcome Justice Morin.
Good morning. Danse. Nadaskumunu de Bedutian, de Bebixquian. Absisna neo anegunst magi minigusian, de Bixquataman. And Stutamwin. Good morning. I want to thank the pipe carriers this morning in saying the prayer for us here. I think having that type of opening is always good because it reminds us of the solemn nature of what we are dealing with. We are dealing with lives now and into the future. It's important that we always remember that if we start things in a good way, we will be guided by that. I want to start by explaining a bit in terms of my background, only because it'll serve to give a basis from where I was coming from when I looked at setting up the Cree Court. What were some of the factors in my life that gave me that impetus to look at things in a certain way? Because I also learned things from my own parents in relation to how I was brought up. My dad was a survivor of a residential school, and so I have that experience in dealing with my relatives, in dealing with our family, having that type of situation. And the other thing, I don't represent any court in this particular situation. I retired, and I know that it says that I started in '78, but actually I started as a probation officer in 1973. I was the youngest probation ever. I think I was 4 years old. Well, somewhere's there. After taking a course, because when I was accepted in university after graduating from grade 12 back in '71, I had nowhere to go, and I applied to university, and I always said I went into social work by default because I didn't have any money. Nobody ever explained to me anything about student loans or anything of that nature, and there was no money in getting help from different situations. I looked up an old teacher. He says, well, you know, we don't have any money for university, but we got these 5 seats that you could take social work in SIAST in Saskatoon, and that was 1972. I went there. I had nowhere else to go. I said, well, I'm unemployed. I think I'll do that for 10 months. I got a job right after that in Meadow Lake. Back then it was Department of North Saskatchewan when they started that impetus. But anyways, it was a situation where I had to start somewhere. I wanted to do something, and I think probably it was after a long walk after midnight digging ditches, and I had to put on the fire to make sure we could dig the next morning. I think it's when I realized maybe there's something better than this. That's where I started. But if I go back in terms of what other parts of my education were important, the other parts of my education that are important is to look at my upbringing. As I said, my dad was a residential school survivor, and my mother, they had been married, they got married back June 6, 1944. They had their own D-Day, is what I always said. And out of that, they had 6 children. I always admired my parents for the tenacity, the perseverance, and the will to survive in certain situations. Back in very early in their time, they lost one of their sons, my older brother that I never met, in a bad accident of, you know, the hummocks with 2 strings and wrapped blankets became undone, and my brother accidentally hung himself. He was a little over a year old. Tragic situation. After that, my parents had another child, and that's where things really changed. Back then, you had to get permission to leave the reserve, and my brother was sick, and my parents asked the Indian agent if they could take their son to the Paw, Manitoba from Sturgeon Landing so he can get treatment. Indian agent, much to everybody's surprise, must have had medical training because he was able to diagnose and said, there's nothing wrong with your son. My brother died. Out of that decision, my dad and my mother were really quite upset, to say the least. They enfranchised because that's what the Indian agent really wanted. So they moved to Cumberland, which is where I grew up, Cumberland House. My dad had been in Sturgeon Landing attending the residential school. His parents, quite some time before, had said, go to school and we will follow you. Neither of my grandparents went to residential school. So they didn't know some of the things that occurred, but they followed their children to Sturgeon Landing and built their home there, and they were merely a kilometer, less than a kilometer from the school. They were able to see their children on Sundays if they went to church, and also, of course, some games that occurred between men or other people in the community. But my dad stayed in the residential school. That school burnt down in 1951 or 52. My dad had long since left before that. So in Cumberland, of course, I grew up. Cree was the first language. That's what I learned, my first language. And what I learned from my parents is that they became caregivers. My mother did that very early in her age, in her background. When she was 12, going on 13, she lost her mother, and she had 3 other siblings that she had to look after. She, in fact, became the mother of her siblings. If somebody is from Manitoba, you'll remember the name Roger Carrier, because my mother was a Carrier for last name. Roger and Marie-Louise, a great paddler, and Elise. All of them are gone with the exception of Elise. She's now 91 years old. But they, in essence, saw my mother as their mother. Later on, different people came to my parents. One was a young guy who was in Cumberland, spent a lot of time in our house, and he ate most of his meals there because it was a safe haven for him in many ways. So what I learned from my parents was compassion, understanding of Wīciwikamātowin, the traditional belief of our relationship, and what role we have to play. Later on, when her older sister died, they left a number of children, I think 6, because the father left in his grief, and these were young children. My parents took them in. All of a sudden, we had a household of 6 other children there. Caregiving was very much in my life. Understanding and caring and what that means. To this day, they're my brothers and sisters. They're not merely cousins. In 1970, another tragic incident took place in our family. My uncle, along with his wife, drowned, left 9 children. Some of you will know the name of Senator McCullum. Her sister, Emma, was married to my uncle, and she drowned with her husband back in 1970. Again, my parents tried to take on the role, and that's where they met Indian Affairs. Indian Affairs didn't think my parents were worthy or good enough to be parents. They would not allow them to take those children. My parents kept in contact, kept finding out where they were, which foster home they were in, kept track of them. Finally, in 1975, they got them. They convinced, they picked them up, they found them working in a farm field somewhere. They picked them up, then the fight started. They won out without having to go to court or anything else. They were allowed to look after the children. And so from there, I gained more brothers and sisters. So that type of background has grounded me in many different ways. Not only to be grounded in some of the core beliefs that we have of love, wisdom, humility, compassion, all those things are part of who I am. So when I became in a situation where I became a father and then separated later on, I ended up with the custody of my son when he was 2 years old. So I had to maneuver that type of responsibility even throughout law school, and maneuver and manage my time. I learned how to say no to my friends. No, I can't, I gotta study. No, I can't. Danny has to go to hockey practice. No, I can't, he has to go to, it was no. Learning how to say no was one of the best things I ever learned in terms of influence, in terms of that. So how did that help in relation to looking at later in life when I got involved in the legal world? Certainly, when I started looking at being involved in defense work, I never worked for government in relation to doing defense work unless I represented somebody through legal aid as in a number of matters. But I worked as a defense lawyer. I did child care cases to a minimum. They were very emotionally charged. I got away from family law because I was even more emotionally charged. When you got somebody phoning you saying they can't have access, and that's on a Friday night, and you're maneuvering this and that. But one of the things I got into was major criminal law work. And the things that we do to each other in our communities is a major, major tragic situation. I represented, of course, people that were charged with all different types of cases, be it murder, be it spousal assault, be it sexual assault, many different things. But again, that became a situation where you're dealing with that and you're maneuvering with that type of thing. Some people will say, how can you represent this person? How could you represent that person? I had the belief, still do, that every person deserves a defense. That you're not the judge in that situation. Somebody else will judge him, but you got to make sure that they are afforded all their rights in whatever forum they're in. So I gained that understanding of making sure that even those we feel are in a bad way, are bad people in somebody's eyes, and I've seen the pain, I've seen the suffering of people that have lost loved ones through major situations, but there's also people on the other side. So when they asked me to become a judge, the first time they asked me to become a judge was 7 years into my career. I said, no, I'm not going to take judgeship. Because your rules say 10 years, and if I take the appointment now, all I'll ever get is, you only got it because you're Indigenous. I said, no. I'm going to enjoy my practice and keep working at that. I got into other interesting cases, national cases of dealing with, in the Nerland inquiry, was dealing with a Nazi who shot a trapper through his door, and having that, when he got special treatment, he was charged with manslaughter within a week of the incident, pled guilty within a short period of time, and the grandmothers of the community rose up and said, what is going on here? How come this guy is getting this type of special treatment? I remember Maria Campbell. I remember different people who marched down for the courthouse in Prince Albert to raise the notion our people are not getting treated right. This guy shot Leo Lachance, 2 shots through the door, or 2 shots on the floor, 1 through the door. How come he's getting this special treatment? They pushed for it. Eventually, there's an inquiry. It was then I learned, and not before, after 3-4 days of testimony, I was starting to, something's wrong here. What am I missing? This man was a Nazi. He always put out the Nazi flag every time that this particular Carney Lerland guy had a birthday. And so he became well known. And then actually made national news when he was confronting people in Coronation, Alberta, wearing his Nazi paraphernalia. And on the other side of the fence was some Jewish people wearing their striped pajamas and prison garb that they themselves represented of where they came from. It was then I started thinking, why is this guy being protected? Well, it turned out in some of the questions, and my questions were getting closer and closer to the area they didn't want me to be in. And it was then Delia Pikikiu, who was one of the commissioners along with Mr. Justice Hughes, said, he has not been told, he does not know, talking about me, because they wasn't disclosed to me, that everybody else and all the lawyers knew from the disclosure from the Crown, and they kept it from me, was this guy was an informant. He was burning the candle both ends from the middle. He was an informant for the FBI against the Ku Klux Klan in the States, and he was an informant against his own Aryan nations in Canada. That is why he got a sweetheart deal in terms of it. So that was also something that, and the hate mail that I got in dealing with that, I opened a few of them and they were nasty and ugly and everything else. I think I only kept one letter, just one of those things you might have as an ugly memento. The rest, I put them in the garbage. It didn't matter what they thought of me. It didn't matter that they were focusing on me. I was focusing on different things. But again, it brought to me the clear message that we must keep fighting for things that are important. And with that family, I remember David Lachance, who was very stoic in his situation, said, keep it up, you're on the right track. And I remember going to sweats, going to a sweat lodge a number of times to feel the cleansing. It's something I don't talk about often in terms of what I did, but those were things I did to get back on track, to make sure that I had some support somewhere. So I kept at it, and so when they asked me to look at the Cree court, like I said, in the 7th year, I didn't want to succumb to the thing that I would get an appointment early. But I started working on it. I didn't apply to court. I started working on it. And in there, I started looking, what's a Cree court going to look like? Well, number one, Cree language. I need a prosecutor who speaks Cree. I knew one person. I sought him out, and I said, why don't you go article for the Justice Department, provincial prosecutors? And then you know how to prosecute, and you can be a prosecutor in the Cree court. So that we have a Cree speaker. He did. He went and got his articles, became a prosecutor for a while, and he was a former RCMP. So he had that background in terms of working with prosecution, so they accepted him. I knew they would. The next step was to find Cree-speaking clerks, because it was important. So I also knew how the Public Service Commission looked at things. They would look at resumes and somebody said they spoke Cree. How are they going to check that? I insisted that I interview those people who said they were Cree speakers. Well, it took a bit of jostling around. That hasn't been done before. I said, well, it's time we did. Remember, I still hadn't been a judge, still not a judge. I'm doing this before. I'm preparing. And so I interviewed people. I gave them a probation order. I said, can you explain that to me in Cree? Said, well, it says you speak Cree. Well, got rid of 3 people. And the other 3, then I gave it to them, and they would look at it, and I knew they would have some trouble, because how do you say probation in Cree? You know, those type of things. But they were able to explain. Okay? So they're saying, you got sentenced to this, you have certain points that you have to follow in your probation order. So that was done. We got those hired. 2 clerks that we started out with. They were the most loyal clerks that I ever had. We became a unit, became a tight unit. The next one was to try and find a legal aid lawyer. I, in my past, had a bit of a run-in with legal aid in different scenarios when I sat as a legal aid board back before I was a lawyer. So I was not necessarily looked upon favorably from the administration of that outfit. So they wouldn't allow me to interview people that wanted to be on the legal aid. So they did still hire an Indigenous person, but the one they didn't hire, the one I was really pushing that they could hire, was Harold Johnson. Some of you might know who Harold Johnson was. Harold Johnson had articled for me a number of years ago, and he wrote a book on alcohol is killing my people and yours. And he had very definitive ideas in terms of alcohol and abuse of alcohol. But I felt he was learning Cree so fast and doing that. It was something that, and he was living off the grid. He was my type of person that I wanted to see in Cree Court. But the two people that were in a hiring situation in legal aid said to me, oh, it's so nice to have a young Indigenous lawyer and he's gonna learn his language. And I'm going, oh, nothing I could do. But he did provide the service, but he couldn't do it in Cree. So my clerks would help him for people that didn't know Cree, they would interpret for that. But we had all Indigenous court in that. And that was in 2001. But remember I said that I hadn't applied, and they kept saying that to me, but you haven't applied yet. I said, I know. I said it'd be a little unseemly for a judge to be negotiating with government as to what he wants to see in the program, because I would be restricted in certain ways in terms of judicial ethics as to what I could do. I thought of that in that sense. So I put in my application on a Friday, and remember, they wanted me. I knew that, and I knew I wanted something. I put in my application on a Friday. I was appointed on a Tuesday. And then that started in 2001. In the meantime, in the process of doing all the other stuff, I was talking and looking at statistics in all the areas that we're serving, and looking what was coming up, what kind of difficulties were being dealt with in communities, which communities had the highest speaking rate of young people, adults, and then looked at a breakdown. And of course, you still got to figure out, you're the one that needs to travel to all these places, along with your clerks. So putting that in place took some time, but we worked it through with band council and court workers as to what we could do. And then the next thing I did was to move the courts from the neighboring communities onto the reserve, okay? For instance, in Shellbrook, we moved it to Whitefish, and same with other communities. The only ones that did have their court already in place for quite some time was Pelicaneros, my First Nation, Peter Baltan Cree Nation. So that itself was pretty major to try and pick out. Then I was also dealing with the issue of the TH dialect, Y dialect, and smitherings of N dialect, 3 different dialects. I got proficient in using Y dialect from my days working on the west side, Buffalo Narrows, Isla Crosse, Green Lake. They all spoke Y dialect. When I was a probation officer in that area in the 70s, that's where I worked. And then Laurens, TH, and also my father spoke the TH Cree dialect. My mother spoke the N dialect. So I was raised with that background. So then again, starting to look at what is it that you're going to do different in Cree court? Well, we did trials, we did bail hearings in Cree. One of the things I really noticed was young people. And the other thing we kind of did was to make sure when they introduced video court in certain situations, I volunteered our court to do that. Young people will look at any TV and will pay attention to anything that goes on in front of them. And what is video court but looking at a screen and the judge is looking at you? That type of communication. But one of the things I noticed is that I would often talk to young people and I would ask them if they spoke Cree. And they'd just perk up. The importance was communication. So people would sometimes ask me, well, what about interpretation? What about this? What are you going to do about that? I said, that's a court process to which I only have some control. My job here is to make sure that people have communication. So if they started in Cree, I would focus in Cree. If they switched to English, I would switch to English. If they went back to Cree, I went back to Cree. The issue was communication, not strict adherence to any type of process. Because if you broke it down and said, wait a minute, you started in Cree, we're going to... No. That breaks down. That puts up another barrier of communication. If they want to switch over for some words, go for it. Back and forth. The idea is communication. That's what's important. So in doing that, you're also dealing with certain things in terms of how we need to listen to each other. And I knew backgrounds of people, familial knowledge of the different communities. I learned that in talking to elders. I learned that in talking to people. In the north especially, Wīciwikamātowin. Who was related to who? And what is their relationship in relation to the community? And also, you always found people in the community, in court, that were there because they were concerned of what was going on in their community. There would be, I'm just thinking in terms, I think all of them were women that created that. So I felt it was important that I communicate with these people. So I taught them how to rise up in court so that I would notice them. And if they had something to say, they would just stand up. I said, that's what lawyers have to do. That's what they need to do. If they want to raise something, they stand up, they gain my attention, then we talk. I allowed people from the audience to stand up, and if they needed to say something, I would listen. Again, it's a bit of a breach in relation to how some judges might operate their court. I looked at it as the importance of communication. They have something to say, they have some stake in this community, they want me to learn something, it is my job to learn. So, I suppose, keep an open mind is what I always said to myself. For a certain period of time, there are times that you would have people say things in court that were irrelevant to the issue at hand. I would politely tell them that there'll be another day for that discussion. It's not to attack people because they feel they need to say something. You don't attack people. I didn't operate in that basis. I have a strong enough voice if I ask somebody to sit down because that was not appropriate. A good portion of the time that would be listened to. If they didn't, I wasn't sure what they'd do. I'd do. But that again, that was a form of communication. That was a form of community input into a court process that was not there before. So those type of little roles that got set aside and dealt with a certain way opened up the door for many people. Like I said, most of them were women. They were caring about people. This young guy, he has this problem at home, and you know, you're hearing that type of information. It's in open court, it's recorded, it can be checked, and if somebody wanted to put that and address that later, they could do so if they got different information. But I looked at it from that perspective. So again, Wīciwikamātowin is a concept that comes from there, helping one another. These were women, or these were people that cared about their community. They want some input into that particular process. Again, you're practicing what that open approach to allowing people to help in their own community. And believe me, there was enough tough situations that I dealt with over the years in terms of that. And you know, child welfare will bring that type of information to your forums. And in what forum you have that, and in what way you become decision makers. I was a decision maker in court in relation to many different issues. In terms of situations, spousal assault was major. I've seen it from different situations when I was growing up, luckily not in my home, but I've seen different people come into our home in different states. So I knew that was there in that sense. And caregivers that my parents were involved in those type of situations. So you see that type of thing. And then you come across, again, government or prosecutions would have rules like, once there is a charge, there's zero tolerance of getting rid of those charges. One of the things the prosecutor did in our court was he would talk to the witnesses. He would find out they were reluctant to come and testify. So instead of going after that particular witness and forcing them to testify, which you found in other places, they would call up the case, they would call up the witness doesn't show up, case dismissed for want of prosecution. Okay, that's what zero tolerance got them. What Judge Bird, he became a judge after, Judge Donald Bird, did was that he would talk to them, and he would talk to the other side, and he would get a peace bond so that the woman could have a say. If, on one of the things he would put is, he could not come to the house with even under the influence of one bottle of beer, one drink. The thing was to make it safe in that home. And I would end up always saying to them, don't ever quit asking for help. Don't ever quit calling for help. The police need to know that you have to be safe. It's not a question of prosecution as being a major thing. It's getting the message that we care about what happens to people that come to court. It was important, again, to understand the dynamics of what was going on in the community. If I merely called the case, got rid of it, nothing would be done. But in the way that he approached it, he would say, if you take alcohol counseling, if you take this for the year and you don't breach this order, the charges will then be set aside. Okay? So it allowed for that type of mediated approach. also a preventative approach in relation to having something done. But of course, how long those type of situations last, I'm not sure where things are at now. The Cree Court still continues, because before I left, I had been asked to be elevated to back then it was Court of Queen's Bench. I said no. I cared about the Cree Court, but I didn't care about being put in a status of being a Queen's Bench judge. The Cree Court was important to me, so I looked around for somebody to take over so I could leave. One of the things that happens to you, and you'll find that as caregivers, as people who have to testify, as people who have to make the decision of taking children away, you see many different things, it'll take its toll on you. It'll take its toll on you. You've got to look after yourself. It took its toll on me in terms of seeing the blood and everything else that I saw in pictures. Every case that I ever dealt with in preliminary hearings, of watching where the knife went in and branched off this rib cage and onto this, and this is where it pierced the heart. You'd have pictures of the cavity of a body. If you don't think that bothers you, you're pretty tough. I know that police see the same thing, because they have to sit in those autopsy rooms. But over the years, that took its toll. Your child care workers, your people who are in the front lines, you need to look after your people. So that type of situation. Not everything is rosy. We want a rosy ending. But how that gets there, and how our people are still involved in many situations, we still have to deal with taking care of your staff, taking care of those decision makers. If you're going to be sitting in a situation where you might be a group of 6 having to decide whether the case has been made that this child is in need of care, need of protection, that an order has to be made that the agency wants, you have to decide on that type of evidence. It's on a balance of probabilities, and certainly not as high in terms of beyond a reasonable doubt. But you still have to look at that type of emotional pain of people in front of you. It takes its toll on you. I balanced my life in many different ways. One of them was to clearly make sure that I did not rely on any intoxicants of anything to deal with that. If I did, it was in moderation, but it was not something. I learned that when I became a single parent, that I could not be under the influence of anything if I was going to raise my child. And I put it the same way that I do now to this day, is to try and have a healthy living lifestyle. I knew that when I was a lawyer, I think there was 3 of us in the province, Saskatchewan at that time, back in the 80s. It was me, Don Worm, and Albert Angus, I think, when we started. And then different people came along. When I became a judge, there was one other person in Regina that was, he had been raised in a home, but he was clearly a Métis person. Even his last name was. And then, of course, there's another person that was deemed to be the first Indigenous judge in Saskatchewan, and we'll leave it at that as far as what their name is. So, those type of situations of having to make findings of fact of your people. And this is one of the more problematic areas that can occur. And depending in terms of how you draft your relationship with decision makers, or you become the decision makers, and how you approach those different things, it'll make a big difference. In Alberta, of course, no Queen's Bench judge looks at child care hearings. In Saskatchewan, they still do. When I took over the Cree Court, a Takakup approached me and said, "We want to move our Child and Family Services hearings away from Queen's Bench. Would you come to Atakakup and hear our cases?" I did. I can't remember ever running a trial in that community. Why? We looked and pushed for a mediated approach. What can we do together to work something out? What is important here? What's the best interest of the child? Where are you thinking of placing this child? Well, how are they related? Those are the discussions we had. So we had those discussions in the early 2000s in Cree Court. I didn't articulate to everybody in Canada what I was doing. I always thought flying below the radar is a good thing. Just get it done. Just do it. It doesn't mean that the frontline workers weren't dealing with tough things. It just meant they were now coming to a forum that I didn't feel that I had all the knowledge necessary for a decision to be made, and if they wanted to work things out between themselves, then why not? I would listen to what they worked out. I would look at the plan. My questions were always, what about the parents? You are terminating parental rights. What are you going to do with those young couple that you're leaving behind? How are you going to help them in this order? What can they do and what they must do in order to gain custody back of their children? We know, and I know from looking at old case law, I still remember one of the cases that always bothered me was Racine versus Woods from way back, a Manitoba case where best interest of the child, and they felt that cultural ties were not good enough. Look at the legislation now. It answers that question, doesn't it? Cultural ties are important. In that particular case, it was the foster parents who wanted to take over adoption of that child, and they refused the community to get custody of their child, their member. They didn't see the importance of that. Now the legislation is there that that can't happen again. But those are the type of things that when we looked at even in Pelican Arrows or Sandy Bay, where we did Cree Court, I'm thinking I did 2 cases of actual trials in Pelican Arrows, and I think I might have done maybe 2 in Sandy Bay in the 18 years I spent in those communities. I stayed in the same circuit for that length of period of time. I was 3 weeks on the road. Fly in 1 week to every community that I worked in. Next week I drove to those communities. The following week I flew again. It was a tough circuit. But I cared for what needed to be done. I felt I was making some difference. I don't know if I did. But certainly, when you look at how are we going to look at best interests of the child? I remember how it used to be. There was an old case called R versus Eliza. It was a case that looked at strictly the poverty situation of a child and how many people were living in it. Nothing to do so much as to the neglect, as to a child being hurt in any way, What do we have now? Some legislation that says you cannot rely on the poverty situation of people in order to apprehend children. That's a big plus. But yet, poverty is still the major cause of a lot of this turmoil. Addictions is still a major cause of all these addictions of the people that come towards us. When I looked at Cree Court, one of the things that I discussed with different elders over the years was trying to understand, who is this person in front of me? With young people, you usually found young people that were busy, caught in their own world of doing things, and they're trying to survive, sometimes out with their friends, couch surfing, doing this as young people, getting in trouble. And so you ask yourself the question, is this a criminal? Or is this a young child in need of help within that community? Is this a person that we need to punish? Because that seems to be the order of the day. Then you looked at the people who come to you and they're so ravaged with the addictions of alcohol and now lately drugs, and they'll do anything and everything to support that habit. Are they the true criminal? Then you have those that have been straight and narrow for a long time, get in a situation, make their biggest mistake of their life, get drunk, jump in a car, and kill somebody. The order of the day in relation to that is that usually it's jail time. But ask yourself, is that the true criminal? I probably dealt with 5 people that I would call imatsatsit. You know, I looked at young people, I'd say, it's a CP target, they don't want to listen. The people with alcohol problems, not in terms of money, but they're poor in relation to life skills and how they can help themselves get out of an addiction situation. Then you have somebody who made a big mistake. Then the last one, the evil one, the one who will do anything and everything to hurt anybody because they have no feeling for other people. Like I said, I've been involved in the criminal justice system for 50 years. I probably ran into 5 of those people. I remember discovering that I might be representing one after a certain situation. Yet, all the laws that we deal with and everything that is brought upon us that is now enforced upon our people come from terrible cases. The Paul Bernardos, the Clifford Olson type of cases. Then you get minimum sentences being asked for, putting a square peg in a round hole. That type of situation, because not everybody's the same. That if we look at who is in front of you, in looking at GLADU factors, and you'll hear people, GLADU factors should be a factor in child care. Yes, very much so. It should not only be criminal law, it should not only be bail hearings, it should all be with child care issues. GLADU factors are very much running through that. So you're constantly looking at who is it that I have in front of me, and how am I going to deal with their situation? That's what I was constantly dealing with. And in talking to people, and I've had some terrible cases in front of me. I still recall one case where a young girl gave birth on the side of the road. And she wrapped her baby swaddled in a blanket and left. The child died. That young person was charged, first with second-degree murder. Done some talking. Finally, when it first came to our court, it was in my jurisdiction. And some questions were asked as to whether that was a correct charge. Unlawful act, not caring, could be made out in terms of murder. Is it manslaughter? It finally got down to infanticide, causing some death. But yet, the real thing that bothered me in that situation is because looking at the age, looking at that situation, this young person was 14. It was not immaculate conception that took place at 13 years of age, where she could not give consent. There was a perpetrator out there. So you know that something else is going to be going on out there in the community. But what I also remember, and this can happen to you, and I don't know all the dynamics in relation to how it got to there, but when she was in court, the only person that was there supporting her was her, I think it was, I'm trying to think of the title they had, Victim Services. And there was one other person sitting there in court. She was alone. I didn't send her to jail because that was not the issue. The issue was protection. The issue was she needed to be protected in the situation. What has she done wrong? And what was the development of this person? So you see those type of cases. So about 6 months later, they charged another individual for the sexual assault of that child. I said, I can't deal with this because you know my comments on the last occasion. And they said, no, none of us have a problem with you dealing with it because we know that you'll deal with it in a fair way. If you ever felt alone in some situations, I felt so alone when it'd be equivalent to this room being full, as it is, supporting that perpetrator. It was empty with the child. It wasn't with the person who got charged for getting her pregnant. It's a sad scenario. But you will find that kind of violence in these cases. We always have to still keep in mind that we are dealing with people. You still have to look at the perpetrator. You still have to look at all the circumstances behind that. And in this case, you'd be looking at what's the best interest of that child in your scenario. But those can be the situations that you'll find. They're not easy, they're tough. But you know what? Our people have been resilient enough over the years that we have learned to deal with tough things and we have survived. That's why you're here. You will make those tough decisions. I get triggered too. It was about that time, I think my wife said to me, you know, you're screaming at night. And in the morning, I had no idea, no memory of it. But that's the kind of pressure you internalize If you don't get help for it, it will come out in different ways. It came out at night in the form of screaming. I remember talking to welders sometime after and even way before that about when do you become vulnerable? You become vulnerable when you're sleeping. There's always an aura of an opening where people can come at you. And the things that can come at you is when you're in a state of either sleeping or whatever. That's when they came at me, of those type of things. I don't believe it was so much the type of decisions I made, but rather the type of pain I was seeing in front of me on a daily basis. I think that's what it was. When you do that type of work, and you have to make decisions, tough decisions about people, because when I just said a little while ago, I never felt so alone, and the people were asking support for that individual, and I had to look at and say no. And after I made that decision, I sent that person to penitentiary. But one of the things I talked about was the role of an uncle. What is your role as an uncle? What you did was to sever the tie that is so important, that where she could have got support, you became the monster. Those are the type of discussions I would often have with people in that court. Those are the type of discussions you will find yourself in dealing with people. Of what role do you have? When I dealt with spousal assault, I would say that is not what we are taught as men to deal with our partners. That is not a teaching that we have. Where is the love? Where's the respect in that situation? So I had those type of tough discussions. If you're going to make decisions about people and you have to terminate their rights, and in what forum, in what way, and how they do that, how you choose to deal with that, let's look at that for a moment. In what forum? Is it going to be a situation where you are leaving everything to the judge, or why can't you make changes? Remember what I did in Cree Court? I went out, sought out a very specific way I was going to do things. There is room for that type of discussion. I'm not representing anybody here. I didn't contact anybody in government as to what could be possible now, because here in Saskatchewan, Saskatchewan is still in charge of setting up the courtrooms in wherever there might be. It doesn't preclude you from moving those type of courts onto the reserve. I think I'm thinking we have 4 Indigenous judges in Saskatchewan now, provincial court. But if we train people and if you deal with people on the home community and you make the decisions yourself, you will still run into the case of the appellant viewpoint. And that's where the work comes in dealing with how solid is that decision in terms of what you're dealing with. I have confidence in people. You know why? For years, the rest of the public have gained confidence in the jury system. And I'm sure one friend of mine would say, well, they believe in the jury system because it was predominantly white. But you know, I worked in the north. I worked with, in situations where there were shootings. We picked juries. We literally picked juries before we went into communities on any type of hearings dealing with when a person dies either in jail or there's always a hearing in the communities. They have a 6-person jury system. So you know there's forums out there that can be changed and that they will look at. Why can't you pick a jury for a longer period of time of people that are got some major training? We're not that big a province that we can't have a number of them that can deal with situations in any given community. Somebody, number in your community. Look at that avenue. Is it possible? Explore that. Explore that avenue so that you can have a jury help somebody decide in terms of child care issues as unique. And because we want to take over in terms of decision making, why can't you? Look at it. Is it a viable option? I don't know the full answer to that. But when they're willing to make some changes, they'll do anything. They were willing to make changes in relation to Cree Court. They saw the validity of it. Because one of the other things I did in now when I said, it is not going to be a project. Because they initially talked about, oh, it's going to be a Cree Court project. I said, no, I'll not take it. It has to be incorporated into the provincial court so that no cabinet can erase that court because it's part of the system. It's part of the court delivery system. If there's a project, oh, that project was good, we'll wipe it away. No. It's incorporated into that system. But there are shortcomings to that. But it is an avenue. If you want to look at strictly making your decisions and then be aware that you're still, whatever arrangement, whatever agreement you have, if the people get a lawyer, they have every right to contest any ruling you make, to second guess your thinking. So what happens then? That's where it's important as to what you play and how you coin and how you deliver what the best interests are and what you rested on and what evidence you rested on and how good was it. Okay? Because we know that anybody can make a complaint. You don't get any disclosure of that information until such time they are going to be witnesses. Okay? That's one of the rules within that if you look at the Act. Only when they become witnesses, then any statement they made will be disclosed to government, Indigenous government, lawyers, or any party. But if it's anonymous and they're not going to be used to testify, you might not get to see that. Well, I suggest that those are things that lawyers will take a hard look at if they're representing people who are parental rights are going to be terminated by your agencies. You're taking over to a certain extent what government has, but I know that your heart is in the right place, that you want to make sure, because you're governed by what we have experienced collectively. We know that it's fundamentally wrong how our children have been taken away. We have that as a basis. That is a solid base. And as you move into the future, you can deal with those hard subject areas. It'll be constant. I don't even know what time I started. But I will leave it at that. There's more I could say, but maybe people have some questions. It's 11:45 now. I think we started a little 10:40. Oh, it's only been an hour.
We do have runners out on the floor with blue t-shirts if you want to ask any questions. The floor is open. Can't see. Over here? Oh, over here in the middle? Runner?
Mr. Bugler.
Can't see. The light is so bright you can't see.
Wīciwikamātowin.
Yeah, you brought up a really crucial issue. As I was chatting with you earlier, right after our break, I worked for the Regina Drug Treatment Court for 3 years in Regina. It's an actual drug court. And I worked with many hardened drug addicts for the province. I worked for court services. But at that time, I was requested to do a presentation to the federal and provincial judges on what is an Aboriginal elder, because they didn't have the slightest idea of what they were looking for. Is it just any gray-haired elderly man that came into their court? And what kind of criteria does his elder have? But then you triggered something with me. I did training for all the Regina City Police. At that time, over 640 officers. They come and borrowed me from my place of work. They wanted somebody to do Aboriginal awareness training for all the Regina City Police. And I got permission from my boss to get to do that training, so I did that. And it took me 8 weeks. 2 days a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays. I had over 45 officers in each session. And all I was doing was teaching them about Aboriginal awareness and culture enhancement. But then the majority of them I learned in those sessions were suffering a lot of mental stress, trauma disorders, and traumatic issues, all because they were being confronted by trauma, pain, continuously every day. And I told them there's a simple method that Native people use, and that's they decontaminate themselves every day with a simple smudging ceremony. So I had to teach them how to smudge and how to cleanse themselves of that trauma that they were carrying around. And when you said you were screaming in your nighttime sleeps, that was, I think, you had seen and heard so much painful issues in your line of work over the years that was coming out in little bits and pieces. So your wife noticed that. And she told you about that, and you didn't know how to deal with that. But I guess you have dealt with it. That's why you're sitting up there, and I'm over here. That time, I was struggling with addictions to tobacco. I was smoking excessively every day, about half a pack of smokes every day. And my wife told me, and one time, you know, your lungs are just rattling every night. So you better quit. So I did quit. It's been 18 years now that I've had tobacco in my lungs, and I sent that tobacco spirit away. I smoked prayer pipe. This morning I did pipe ceremony here along with Elder William Ratfoot, and but smoke doesn't bother me anymore because we have a power to cleanse ourselves out of the ailments that are bothering us. So a lot of frontline workers, police officers, ambulance attendants, social workers, frontline child protection workers, they see and hear a lot of pain every day. And a lot of them take that pain home with them. without cleansing themselves with a simple smudge. And that's all I wanted to recommend to all the workers here while they're here. All you frontline workers that are here in this room, do some basic cleansing. It's very beneficial to your well-being, the health of your well-being. Thank you very much, Judge, for your presentation. I really enjoyed it. Hi, hi.
Thank you very much. I agree, because I remember what I said. One of the things I did in an early inquiry was to attend sweats and different ceremonies. I remember going to different ceremonies with the late Jimmy Mayo and different people that I met over the years. And those are things that I did. I just wanted to focus on one of the areas that I'm familiar with in relation to our First Nation, Peter Bothang Cree Nation. We have 14,000 members split into 8 communities. Fairly big. When you look at some of the stats in terms of what they're looking at and what they used to look at, they have, well, they had 268 until they got an update this morning, 268 children in care. Update this morning was 234. They have 63 facilities. They have 23 homes age appropriate. They have a therapeutic facility. High needs complex homes, 8 homes. Here's one that I like, and I hope she talks to her father. Scott Moe's daughter does on-site visits and figures they have a wonderful program. Do you think maybe she can corner her dad, make him listen for other things? Scott Moe being the premier of this province. I only say that hoping somebody hears. They have 468 staff. I remember discussions way back in the 90s when I was involved. Our office was involved, our law office. One of the things we put together was to make the arm's length relationship from chief and council in relation to the budget of child and family services. That has served them well, because all their buildings, capital buildings, they did not get help from ISC. They did it through surplus and then expended funds and strategic planning in 5 years. They have a cultural camp. They deal with programs such as grief and loss, cultural ways of life, because it's done in the north, fishing, gathering of medicine. They expose that to their children. I see that because when I go up to Reindeer Lake where I have cabin, I often visit a couple of the areas where a lot of these camps take place. So there is movement in our country in terms of what can happen. I'll leave it at that. Is there any more questions? I'm getting hungry too.
Yeah, over here.
Over here?
Yes.
Where? Sorry.
Judy Wilson,
Okay.
Wīciwikamātowin Supporting. My traditional name's Red Hummingbird. I'm from the unceded territory of Sâskwatôn, which is the interior of British Columbia. Thank you for the pipe ceremony this morning, and thank you for the organizers and the hosts for the meeting. I'm with Our Children Our Way as Elder Advisor Knowledge Holder, and I also do that with the National Children's Chiefs Commission. But my question's more around the Aboriginal courts. My mother is one of the elders that served in the BC courts. For Aboriginal court, they've got a few in the province. They were starting to work on including children and family in their courts, but they haven't been able to yet. Judge Linda Thomas was one of the ones that set up the Aboriginal court for us in Kamloops. So it's really, they don't deal with like federal crimes, but they really see the same approaches that you were talking about, meeting the individuals where they're at, and also sitting in a circle with them and with the judges on sentencing. And also a lot of it, they try to do more community work and treatment usually. But the thing they were trying to do is because Aboriginal or Children and Family Court for us is every Wednesday, and it's just filled, like packed to the rafters. And if you miss your name, you could get, then you miss your court case there. But it's so much more support that's needed. I know Corey Wilson from the BC First Nations Justice Council is going to be presenting here this week too. So I know they're also working on that as part of their strategy. But I was just curious about Saskatchewan, if you're already doing that, or if you're thinking about doing Aboriginal Children and Family Court, because it takes up a lot of court time, and I know a lot of the elders work tirelessly in there, which my mother did for many years. And what way forward are we going to do? I know that it's better to have your circles in your communities under our own laws, to work with children and families than them going into the provincial courts. So there's a lot to all these processes that everyone's going to be working on jurisdiction. But at the same time as we're working on jurisdiction, we also need to work on how we deal with the provincial courts. Cook's Jam, thank you.
Well, like I said, I don't speak on behalf of any court, but I think that discussion should take place. I did a lot of sentencing circles in terms of dealing with stuff over the years. Those, again, is input from the community. And I think that is a two-stage process. The first one, I think we need to look at how do we get to be in a situation where we make the decision at the community level as to what happens to whether or not the child goes in care. This next step is planning the programming in relation to support that particular order. So I think that's a two-stage process, and I think you're going to find probably that the second one is easier to do than getting yourself involved in the first one, but I think there's a need to get involved in the first one too. And I think that type of a discussion needs to take place. Like I said, coroner's hearing already pick out juries. You look at what happened in, with all due respect, what happened in James Smith. They had juries picked out in that community in relation to who sat on it, and they made specific recommendations. So it's not impossible. If they want to get things done, there is ways to do it.
I'll just add to that. In our agency, going to court is very few and far in between because, yes, currently we work under the provincial child welfare legislation, but we can apply it according to our needs, our family needs. So what we do is we talk to the family, as Honorable Morin mentioned. We talk to the family, we work with the family, we come up with a plan to ensure the safety of the children. And usually it's like the parents will agree to voluntary agreements in order to ensure the safety of their children. With the inclusion of the prevention dollars into agencies like us, we are now able to, it's part of our strategic plan, pay for private treatment. The majority of the kids coming into our care are parents neglecting their children because of their addiction. That's the number one, like 99%. Very seldom do we see physical or sexual abuse. It's neglect caused by addictions. So we work with the family to come to a resolution and stay out of court. So that's how we are able to apply, work within the provincial system here. We apply it the way we see best for our families, and it has worked. We've also had situations where parents weren't willing to work with us, but we'd arrange for a pre-trial conference with the court, and those tables, we also come to resolutions that the families can agree to, so we don't go to court. So it's not confrontational. But I just want, is there anybody else that had any
Yes, I do.
over, where?
My name is Morin Thomas. I'm from Sycas First Nations, right
can't
here, way at the back.
At the back?
Way
Oh,
at the back.
okay, way over there.
Okay, my question is, when a child comes home and the court lets him go home, what are your plans to help the child adjust to their community? Or what do you do here? I don't know. We do different things in Sycas, so I'm trying to figure out what if yours is better than my plan. Okay?
Is that for me?
I think that's for you.
Well, here, when children are coming home, it's introducing them. Right now, we're working with the province on children they have in care off reserve. They have a unit set up where they will reconnect the children back to their communities. And they send out inquiries to agencies like us. Like, for instance, we're having a cultural camp in a couple of weeks in one of our communities. Social services is actually bringing children to that cultural camp, children that are in their care, and they're trying to reconnect them to their families, their communities, their culture. So we work with them to try to prepare those children to be returned to the community. And sometimes we find extended family with those connections when they come out, when they come and attend one of our activities. So that's one thing that we do in our agency, but there's other agencies in Saskatchewan that may do things differently, but that's how I would respond to that question. Any other questions?
We've got one more over here.
Where, over here? Okay.
Tala Heitzepka, Sâskwatôn listenawayth. I'd like to thank you for sharing your experiences and what you've explained to the people. I'm very fascinated with hearing more about Cree Court. I'm very fascinated about who's standing in front of me, what's best for the child. Coming from Vancouver Island, British Columbia, at first I didn't know what I was getting into, but after hearing you, you've awakened in me a lot of questions. They're putting together legislation, and I think your words are very valuable and things we need to know, especially when it comes to things like denial. Who should leave the home, the child or the adult? What kind of organization should be set up? A ladies' committee, because my mom, my dad always said, she's the key to this family. She holds the knowledge, the names, the masks. So I see importance in that. Communication you talked about. How come words you put in a legislation, the interpretation in English. If we had our own court system, that would be so much easier. And I think our hearts would rest a lot easier knowing that we're talking as a people, not as a court. Etc. Thank you.
Okay, over here.
Dansa Jerry. Bertha Makani na kami
Oh,
stick
dansa.
mo na ikuska.
Not boygin steina dan mama utmi.
Samet you up stick on yanet tige.
Yeah.
I want to speak in my language first to Jerry. Mistake ayu ni meno teno makapisi pigiske and mistake ayu animan ni titain na mistaram. Magayo mista magweguan. Addiction saya cekndosam sak niso. Kiami Sianimak. Pogo, Wīciwikamātowin. Magayo, I just want to talk, I've covered that up, but what you were saying about helping in your community is what I want to do. I've been doing it for many years. I'm a retired teacher. I speak the Cree. The nuns didn't strap it out on me. I kept it and I still use it. And it's a gift I was given, and I use it wisely. I've taught Cree many years in the school I work with, and I also worked in the daycare. After I retired, I go where I'm called. I never say no, even though I think it's going to be hard, but it always turns out so well for me. Creator has guided me and supported me all these years. But the things that are going on today with the addictions and the stuff, there is one story I want to leave with you, because you people are all such good, you have your heart in this, the ways that our things are going right now. I want to tell you a story about this young lady. I was invited to go to an elders camp to support families that are struggling. And I had no idea what it was going to be like, and I had no idea what kind of family I would be put up with. But I went anyway, and it turned out so beautiful. I ended up being with two women that were struggling. One bought her daughter and one bought her grandson, and the other mother bought her two children that I camped with them in the same cabin. It was so wonderful. I got to know the other side of these two women with their struggles, their stories. And one of the young women that I stayed with had been apprehended years ago as a baby. Her mother left her in the hospital. But later on, the mother wanted to find her daughter, and she did. She took her quite a while, but she found her daughter, and she sent her brother to go look for her daughter, and they found her, and they wanted her to come and visit on the reserve. So this young lady came. She was of age. She was 18, and she came to the reserve. And when she came home, she met so much family, so much family. She never went back. She's still there today. And I'm so glad I had this experience. And I was so glad to hear Jerry speak today. He has had a wonderful career, and I thank him. I was his neighbor when we were children. His mother was a wonderful woman. She taught me how to fine-tune my beading, and I actually won first prize. We didn't have home ec in our days. Our families taught us. We had a wonderful community. I have more to say, but time is here. Ego se, tapo egilze.
Hi.
Can I just tell a quick story about her father? One quick story. I was 11 years old, broke my leg, ended up in the hospital and carried her. I was lying there, and then these three old guys showed up. One was Ovid, and the other one was Moïse Constant, and the other one was Moïse Duchien. I thought they were all old already, but I think they were only in their 40s then. I don't. But so one day, I'm running up and down with a wheelchair up and down the hallway, and I got the nurse mad, and so I was back in my room. Then they said, we're moving you. Uh-oh. I said, where are you moving me? Oh, I think you'll like it. So I go in, and there's these three guys in one room. And they start playing cards. And I said, what are you playing? They said, we'll teach you. The story I named that, I wrote that little story up. I called it, They Needed a Fourth in a Cribbage Game. They were lifelong friends for me. Every time I went home, I touched base with Ovid, Moïse, and Moïse. Anyways, that's a little story that I treasure that relationship.
Thank you. Just before, I know everybody's quite hungry, but I just picked up some key points from your presentation. Communication is critical as we develop laws in child welfare. The language is a key piece, making sure that our language is integrated into our laws, our court processes, mediation and reconciliation versus the retaliatory, I guess, system that we have right now in the courts. Working with the families to arrive at a resolution to keep the families safe, and that our laws should incorporate the Gladue factors in child welfare, as well as our natural laws are critical to developing our laws. So those are key points that I picked up during his presentation. I really appreciate his presentation. So with that, let's give him a round of applause.